forecast language was that the Jewish problem had been resolved. And it was not a good time for anybody because of the damage that was going on globally ancillary to that. And it was just a horrid mega death example that really prompted me to start in a lot of ways back in when I first started encountering the hints of this, that something was really nasty beyond politics, to elevate the discussion above politics to what are the root causes to this. And it is this cadre of psychopaths that are intent on doing this, basically because it is their will to do so, and they will not. From their viewpoint, they will not be denied. Why they would do it is beyond my ability to grasp. I do know it is a reality, and I do know that the Israelis are going to have to live with it, as will we, if this war is allowed to go. And there's that issue of determinism.
Thank you.
Lua, you have a question?
I do. I've heard that Ed Dames is claiming that no nuclear weapon will be allowed to be set off, and there's a few other psychics around that are kind of claiming the same thing. I'd like to know, is it possible that those who see the nuclear weapons being decommissioned by parties unknown, space code farts, whatever, are seeing something that is actually going to happen, and that the Webbot is seeing the media response to nuclear weapons not being used rather than nuclear weapons being used?
Certainly, that is certainly a possibility. Not the I don't know about the psychic component and the basically anybody. Let me just stop and state that Ed Dames or anybody who goes that way and states that nuclear weapons will be decommissioned by parties unknown is falling into the same external to the planet savior myth that drives the main three problems on our planet right now: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, which go to this off-planet God that's causing all of these problems. So anybody who says, oh, space aliens are going to save us is parroting the same meme that the powers that be use to control all the Christians, the Jews, and the Mohammedans. So that being said, though, it doesn't mean that they are wrong in the sense that there may indeed be a set of circumstances that do not allow nuclear weapons to go off. We know, for instance, that there is actual data, and I even wrote about it years before it occurred, that would show that the mutation rate of radioactive substances would change as the sun went through this process. And this was one of my reasonings for saying that carbon-12 dating to carbon-14 dating is only good within any given cycle and can't be used to extend back beyond 11,000 years in these cycles because it gets reset every so often. And so it's decaying at a rate now that was not decaying at 22,000 years ago, and it's not a constant. So that being the case, something obviously at a molecular level affects nuclear material, because we're dealing with carbon-14, which is basically a radioactive isotope or decaying isotope of the whole carbon plethora. And so since it's happening at that level, it's conceivable it can happen to other levels, since humans we also have evidence that humans have indeed altered the half-life of radioactive substances, so there's no reason to think that it can't happen as a result of a natural process. Will it? I can't say, but it is quite true to think that all of our forecasts about the mega death and all of this could indeed be the planet's media all heaving a collective sigh of relief at the end of a point of brinksmanship. And I have validated this by going back to 1962 and working through the entire Cuban Missile Crises 8 months ahead of time and following 9 months. And indeed, I can plot the building tension and release language, and it looks a lot like what we're facing now. But we also have to note that it is the same pattern that also shows up in December 7th, 1941, the lead into World War II, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't tell from this viewpoint which way it's going to go. And that is, again, the determinism factor.
Okay, so I know I agree with you about the external savior myth, but it's indisputable that something weird's going on.
I grant you that. And just because we don't have evidence, just because they're parroting a external savior myth, does not invalidate the idea that there may indeed be an external savior that is in no way supernatural. He's just a space alien that is kind enough to not want us to see, will not want to see us blow our butts to hell and back. So they may come on down and do stuff. Or there is another aspect of this too that a lot of people don't understand. I think when I wrote that first article years ago about this. But imagine the situation where, well, in Washington State here, if you have in Western Washington, it's known as the rainy side of the state because the rains come on up and they hit the Cascade Mountains and they rush down and form all these little creeks, millions of little creeks that go into hundreds of thousands of little streams, which collect into thousands of mini rivers, which go into some pretty big rivers that flood everything. So we have this periodic issue of all of the rains. And because of the way the state is set up, we're also dependent on all the little fishes that live in all of the little streams and creeks and so on. So we've got a very powerful fish lobby here. And so the fish lobby decided way back when that to protect the fishes, which I agree with, you needed to be a careful steward if you had a stream going through your property. And so there were certain things that you could not do. For instance, you could not take the trees away from the stream within 250 feet of particular sunny sides, so the stream would maintain its temperature and the fishes wouldn't cook in the stream. And this kind of thing makes sense. And this is even though they regulated it, and lots of people just were bitching and moaning about government and intruding and so forth, this was really a case where the fishes needed the protection, and it made sense to do it this way. And the rules were promulgated not by officialdom, but by biologists who really worked at it for 10 years to get these things solid. And so basically, long-winded way of saying, what if our exploding nuclear bombs is the equivalent of stripping the brush off right up next to a river? And we are just unaware that we are violating the Stream and Habitat Wildlife Act in our local neck of the woods. Well, then the fisheries biologists or, the human biologists from the other planet or the other solar system, more likely, will show up and they may do some mitigation work. And so that indeed could be a potential. I don't see any evidence of it. I see all kinds of stuff going on over our heads with these glasses. And I've seen some stuff that did not look to be, in my opinion, a way in which a human would approach a problem, and it looked in that sense alien. But I don't have any reason to suspect at this stage that they would intrude. They may indeed be doing so, and it makes sense just from the fisheries biologist viewpoint that there's some mitigation going on because we're the little fishes, and we've got some landowners that are just behaving a little bit badly.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Green Meadow.
Hi, Cliff.
Hello.
I had a question about, in Report 5, there was a comment about 1.289 billion deaths.
Yes.
And then there was a whole variety of speculation of what could have caused that. Like it could have been an event, or it could have been the outcome of a long series of things, or a change. Do you have any more thoughts on that number?
The number is striking because it held relatively stable, and you have to understand that we throw out numbers routinely unless they come to us in an aggregate through the text. And so that the fact that it stayed around for a long time was very disconcerting. We still have it within the set that is growing relative to the Israeli mistake and to the slip into release language in March. It is not directly tied to the Israeli mistake, but that particular set that contains that number, it's not headed by that number. The number is ancillary to the forecast language. That is to say, it's one of the, I think it's probably secondary or tertiary support level, but it was still a key set with a lot of growth. But that whole set is effective through April onward. Again, it could be, as noted, that in April we get a huge flurry of emotional release that initiates or is caused by or is associated with mainstream media as well as independent media broadcasting out all kinds of words relative to how close we came or how much of us are at risk relative to, ecological crises or radioactive Pacific Ocean or something like this. The issue for us is, though, that the mere mentioning of that level of number will not fulfill the forecast because the linguistics have long-term value associations that are basically saying the number will be repetitiously referenced for up to 19 months. So the whole process would be about a 19-month process. Now, if we had a very large burst of language in mainstream media that was repeated ad nauseum for a week or more, the way they did Reagan's funeral in CNN or any of these other big officialdom events where you just can't get away from them, those kind of things where it was engineered that way, then I would say, yeah, they could engineer us that we might meet the linguistics there. At that level, but it would take something like that to meet these numbers. There's no question. I mean, not the number 1.2, but rather the support levels. Because I think that was at 0.97 emotional intensity value, which means it's at a hovering level where we can't tell if it's an actual event or what, but the number itself should appear in the repeatedly within the linguistics that are actually manifesting.
Yeah, because it sounded similar to the 300,000 number you got with the Banda Aceh tsunami.
Correct. It came from the same source, from the same stream or same process that led to that number, which was so accurate. And that's why I was so freaked out about the other number, because it really did imply either a giant solar burst or something of, a sixth of the population dying due to the effect of radiation or something horrific at that level. And that number... We have some numbers that show up occasionally, and they're really weird when they do. So, for instance, we had this thing once, the power outage, where we were able to, 3 weeks ahead of time, using only immediacy data, provide a physical description of the place at which the Northeast power outage originated, and then we were able to forecast the language that would appear within the mainstream media that night, all the way through the next day and all the way through the following day. And we knew it would be a short-term event and no terrorism involved, but we also knew that within the first 6 hours of that particular event, the terrorism word would be used repeatedly. Now, that processing brought out a particular number, and that number was associated with, and I think it was 9, and there were 9 rods associated with these grates, and the grates were used to screen out this particular outfall on a river, and there were 3 of these 9 series, and those numbers kept coming up over and over again and got reconnected. That same level of processing has proved itself repeatedly to manifest. So we saw the references in the data. Finally, when they described the place at which the outage had happened, it met our description eerily so. We also, again, had the same process at work in the Banda Aceh. And then now, post that, we've had it with this 1.289 billion. So I have some confidence that the number itself will appear in the media. I hope not in a truly negative way.
Okay, thank you. So going back to what Jules was talking, and you were talking about the sun earlier, you were talking about solar flares, and then we were talking about 3 periods of tension or release, March and December and May.
Correct, yes.
So is that the powers that be anticipating 3 sets of solar flares at that time?
That's our assumption. Okay, what we have is we have continuous release language that starts in March, and it goes, insofar as our data goes, out at least 3 years with no let up and no real saw teeth. It just kind of continually is release language going deeper and deeper and deeper into release. Within that, though, the powers that be entity and those entities that have cross links that go directly back to originate within the powers that be entity, that entity is atypical because it has 3 distinct spikes of building tension, even though the whole of model space is essentially in building or in release language at that point. Fundamentally, the amount of building tension summation within the powers that be entity is minuscule and not enough to even push the greater release language that's within the populace. So it's a question very much of there's 500,000 people in a soccer stadium all shouting for one team, and there's 40 people shouting for the other team at the same time. You're just not going to hear those 40 people, even if you're standing within that group of 40.